Buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti a Roma. Unfortunately, I'm speaking to you from across the Atlantic in New York City. So I am truly disappointed that my recent move across the Atlantic, accompanied with a broken foot, have made it impossible for me to be physically present at this event. I would like to apologize to Paola and Valeria, the conference organizers Lucilla and Enrico, and the audience for this inconvenience. So, in English as a foreign language context, teachers are given the responsibility of preparing their non-native speakers for work in the global context. And if these students are likely to find themselves needing to communicate with people from other cultures through the medium of English and through the medium of the Internet, rather than teach students about using English in an online international context, why not offer them an experiential learning opportunity to do so? And that is why ELF and telecollaboration come together. So, in order to explore the relationship between ELF and telecollaboration, I decided to set up a project between the University of Padova, where I was teaching, and the Ruhr Universität Bochum, where I was doing my PhD studies. So we set up a course in fall 2009, and then based on the things that worked and didn't work, we redesigned the project for spring 2010. And most of the findings I'll be showing you today are primarily from the spring 2010 iteration of the course. So we had students from Padova who were studying for their BA in Modern Languages with a major in English, whereas the students in Bochum were studying for their MA in Education. They weren't that different in age, but the students in Padova did tend to be slightly younger, whereas their proficiency was quite different. The students in Padova tended towards B1, and the students in Bochum tended towards C1 on the Common European Framework for reference. The numbers of students varied slightly. We tended to have more in Germany, and therefore in some of the small group work we had 2 German students working with 1 Italian student. The technology we used was Skype for weekly synchronous audio conversations and a wiki for asynchronous communication and project work. Both projects lasted 6 weeks, and there was a weekly cycle that you can see here. Students were assigned pre-tasks to prepare for their Skype session. Then during the Skype session we recorded their audio as they were speaking, and also the text chats. Then they had a post-task to do based on what had come up in the Skype session, and the Italian students were asked to keep a learning diary to reflect on their learning experience. By the end of the 6 weeks, students had to complete their final project, which was an intercultural collage on the meaning of being a European citizen. So the course aims, the aim of the telecollaboration project was to focus on this concept of near-peer tutoring. In near-peer tutoring, students are nearly the same age, have similar study interests, so that could be English or music, being a European, but they have different levels of English. So in our context, we thought the German students could benefit from practice in tutoring English, because as part of their education degree they will also, if and when they go teach, be teaching English as a foreign language in the schools in Germany. And we thought the Italian students would benefit from being tutored in English, and of course by speaking English with their German peers. This setup is considered to be quite different from the more traditional teacher-expert, student-non-expert relationship, as they were pretty much like peers when they were having their conversations during the Skype sessions, but then the German students were responsible for going and correcting the Italian students' written English in their learner diaries. So it's a different kind of relationship. And what were the specific aims of this study? I can't go into all the aims, but I'll just focus here in research question number 1. So the students in the study were all schooled in a context where the aim of foreign language acquisition was achieving native speaker proficiency. This has been found to be true both in Germany and Italy. So the question was, what is their attitude to spending their English language course time communicating with other non-native speakers using English as a lingua franca? So that was what we were trying to investigate in this particular part of the study. So we collected various sources of data. As I said, we have recordings of their weekly Skype conversations together with a text chat. We had weekly learner diaries by the Italian students. We had pre and post survey results that included both closed and open questions, and teacher observations from both the teacher in Italy and the one in Germany. And we also carried out informal student interviews during class, after class, etc. I think I'm going to focus mostly today on the survey results and teacher observations. So before we started the course, we wanted to know why students wanted to take it, because this project was optional for both cohorts. It was not a compulsory course. Interestingly, however, most of the German students responded immediately they were going to take it to get credits. But some clearly indicated that they were interested also in learning about Italians, and this first student says that it would be a challenging task and a real-life experience. So the student was aware of the fact that it might mimic what one might do communicating via internet with one's peers in real life. And a few students saw that it might be an opportunity to work on their fluency in English by having to use it at least for an hour and a half every week. The Italian students had a similar desire to get credits, but they seemed much more interested in doing the exchange to improve their language skills and to learn about other cultures. In particular, in the Italian system, and I believe this is true in many parts of the world, the skills that are kind of least practiced in class are listening and speaking, particularly with speakers of other languages. And so the Italian students immediately saw this as an opportunity to practice those skills. So then in the open questions, one of them, we asked students, do you think you learned any new skills? So rather than giving them tick boxes, we wanted to hear directly from them. The Italians cited fluency, listening, intercultural communicative competence, and online communicative competence. And I've given just a few examples of their answers there in italics. For example, the intercultural communicative competence, one Italian student said, I learned to consider more important the emotional approach we have with foreign people and how prejudices can affect badly a conversation. So she learned to be less rigid in her views and use more empathy. And similarly, this comment in Italian, I'll just briefly translate it, the one about online communicative competence. This student said that she learned to communicate with foreign students using computer tools, both through oral and written communication. What's interesting is that the skills the Germans felt they had learned were quite different than those that the Italians cited. The Germans cited technological skills. Several of them found it interesting to use the wiki. They had never used one before. And what was most cited were skills they thought they had learned that might be useful for their teaching. So the ability to have a conversation with more than one student at a time, to coordinate the discussion, to listen to people more carefully. And unfortunately, several of the German students actually replied that they had learned nothing. But what's interesting is that in all of the replies from the Germans, there was no mention at all of having learned about culture or language. So to briefly conclude, both cohorts seem to have achieved their degree-specific learning objectives. The Italians were enthusiastic and felt they had learned a lot about language, their speaking and listening. They learned about culture and technology, how to use it for intercultural communication. The Germans were more skeptical, but they felt that they had learned about culture a little bit, technology, but most importantly, how to use those things for language teaching. They didn't seem interested in language learning. There is no evidence in the data that the Italians felt that communicating with non-native speakers was a disadvantage. In some cases, it was actually seen as an advantage. This student said, I appreciate that they've chosen German students instead of English students because it could have been more difficult to speak with them. So the Italian students felt less intimidated by speaking to non-native speakers. There is significant evidence in the data for the German students that they felt that communicating with non-native speakers was at best useful for their futures as teachers, and at worst a waste of time, and in very few cases helpful for their own language development. So based on this data set, these 2 points are, I think, relatively evident. It would appear that less proficient students paired with more proficient students see the exchange as an opportunity to improve their language skills, whereas the more proficient students paired with less proficient students do not see the exchange as an opportunity to improve their language skills and would prefer to interact with native speakers. So this led us to ask what might the possible causes of this very obvious difference be. One, clearly, it might be degree choice, because the Italian students were specifically language students, foreign language students, whereas the German students were studying education, and English was simply one of the things they, quote-unquote, needed to get done to get through their MA and become teachers. One problem might be task design. Some students commented that they would have liked more autonomy in choosing topics, or they would have preferred to be paired one-to-one rather than in small groups. Another cause might be teacher facilitation. Had we intervened more and tried to highlight and point out learning that was taking place by using English as a lingua franca in this context, might have raised more awareness amongst the students. Does it have to do with their past schooling experiences? I mean, after 12 years at least, 13 years plus of being told by English teachers in their schools that they have to achieve native speaker status, it would appear that this myth of the native speaker does persist, particularly in the cohort of the German students, but again, this might be due to the causes I just mentioned. And there also might be some cultural assumptions about how proficient students need to be, where they need to go to learn their language, what they need to do to learn their language, but that would certainly require much deeper ethnographic research that was not carried out as part of this study. So for now, all we can do is offer some possible solutions. I would say that it is worth engaging in ELF and telecollaboration, but we need to better prepare students for this experience, which is very different from what they're used to in these binational, bicultural exchanges that are more typical. So as teachers, we need to more clearly define the near-peer concept and how it might benefit, and how it does benefit both cohorts, and how they fit into that role in the context of these telecollaboration projects. I think it's really important to identify and demonstrate the need for students to learn to communicate in ELF contexts. I think maybe there needs to be some very explicit explanation as to why ELF and telecollaboration both mirrors what takes place in the real world and is truly preparing them for the workplace they will be entering. And again, the German students are studying to be teachers in German schools, but certainly that does not exclude the fact that they might be doing projects with people in other countries using English, or that they might not end up becoming teachers and have other job opportunities. So this needs to be more clearly defined before actually starting the exchange. And finally, as always, when you try something, we redesigned the tasks for the second exchange, and the second iteration was certainly more successful than the first one. So based on the huge data set we have since worked on redesigning tasks to promote more positive experiences for the students engaging in these exchanges, especially for the German students. And a lot more research needs to be done, and I hope that this will happen. And Thank you for watching and listening to me. Unfortunately, I can't answer any of your questions right now because it's probably somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m. here in New York. But please do write me an email if you have any questions, and I'll just finish with my grazie e buon convegno a tutti. Thanks again. Bye.